So welcome everybody. We're working with Pathwork Lecture 184, the meaning of evil and its transcendence, and it's kind of part of a series that we're doing on the Pathwork lectures on evil, and it's kind of inspired by, some of the questions that come up, and I know a lot of people that I work with as well are impacted by sort of this shaking in the world and all of these old sort of agreements or assumptions coming down, and people seeming to, sort of be in a much more uh, antagonistic and warlike place with each other, and justifying it, and being aggressive, and some ways what I would call evil. I mean, it just seems like evil is like kind of in the Lord of the Rings. It's like the forces of Mordor are gathering in some sense, and it feels in a way that we don't want to necessarily just you know try to fight evil with evil, but that there might be something that we can understand, and a way to hold it on the outside of us, and also the way to work with it and transform it. And I think the path work helps us understand that the work that we do internally actually makes a difference in the world. So all of our efforts at our own increase of love and faith, and divine approaches to life, um, make a difference. But even more than that is also our clearing out of our own shadows and our own lower self, and our own, even no matter how subtle it is, selfishness, or our own tendency maybe to go into dominance, or some other form, whatever we often get impacted by from outside of us. Like for me, a lot of times it seems to be the way that I feel like there's an outer control that's coming over, and there's a surveillance state, and there's a way that they are no longer wanting to support freedom and all of that, but they want to sort of have some kind of control. And so those feelings that come up around that, I think probably come from other lifetimes and other things. And so I don't know what's really happening right now or where it's going, but the feelings I want to work with, because I think as I clear that, and find a way to keep, sort of being in the present moment in my heart, that's going to be the best way to navigate through even whatever I might encounter personally of some kind of, outer evil or something. Does that People have anything? I mean, maybe I'm just kind of off in that myself. I don't know. Are people, like worried about the world and where we're going?
I am.
Sometimes I am. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm worried. I
This,
I think that this is just my observation of the psychosis of our president is that his aim is to destroy. If he feels like he's backed into a corner and he cannot have the power he wants to have, I think his aim is to destroy as much as he can on the way out. And that's just, that's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm sensing. And I think it's a very, very dangerous predicament.
and I agree, and I think part of it is, though, also, like for me, part of the question, like whatever triggers me the most about that, about whatever he's up to, and I agree. I mean, there's just so much corruption. There's so much, yeah, like power and control being, given to people that want it selfishly, and you know, it seems like what we need to do is then find, is there any part in me, like like I can't stand this. I even feel now kind of controlled by the machines all the time, and whenever I can't do something that I just want to do the way I want to do it, I got to follow the way the machine makes me do it or something. It kind of makes me agitated, and so I'm kind of exploring these things, like where I go to war with what is, in myself, and some of it makes sense because it feels like it's, I'm defending myself from something, attacking me or something. But there is also this way that I can get very aggressive and domineering in my own lower self, in that. And so I think, that even though I'm not anywhere near like what I'm seeing out there, and for the most part, I have absolutely no desire to dominate anybody else. I want cooperation. I want, mutuality. I want co creation. I want everybody happy. I don't want to just be the only happy one on top of the pile, and controlling everybody else. So I think, there are sort of two different natures in the world right now. Those that feel like, that the goal is to be on top as much as possible, and in control and dominating, and others that are really looking for some kind of a new, possible process, or, exploration of what it means to be human in community and co-creativity and loving relationship. And I think that's where the new is going. But the old has been entrenched for a while, and it's being exposed, more, as well as, exaggerated for us all to see. And then I think it also is sort of asking us to see where, even in the slightest degree, it might be reflected inside of us. Right? So I don't want to control anybody but the ones that are trying to control me. But it's still a way of, going into my control defense, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it sounds like it sounds like you're just trying to protect your nest. And it's right, it's a rightful thing to feel like doing. You've built a nest and you want to protect your nest, and you don't want someone to come in and rip your nest out from underneath of you. And quite frankly, this person in the White House is saying, I don't care about you. I'll rip your nest out right from under you, and I won't think twice about it.
I hear
And
you.
you feel that. You sense it, you feel it, and that's
Right. I agree. And then, and the human way would be just to, like, be in fear, and, be in defense, and try to fight back, and, you know, but I think what we're being asked to in our spiritual development is to consider, and maybe even you fight back, but maybe how can we fight back not in separation, or how can we fight back, like with truth and love, or I know a friend of mine who was mugged a while back, like he was telling me how, like, he went into this state of, connection rather than separation when it happened. And that
wow.
shifted the dynamic, and they didn't take from him. Right. So I don't know that, like if you shift the dynamic, ICE is not going to throw you out of the country, probably not, you know, but there is something that I think we're looking at and trying to explore of, if we change our consciousness, how much can that make a difference in the world? And we have already, a more peaceful and loving nature and consciousness maybe than others. But even, where those things, still live in us, I think it's still part of our journey, to see if we can find a way to love the world into peace, or, calm the world into peace, or, actually, uh, maybe create our own space that's so protected in divine light that even though the forces, seem to be politically active and dangerous, that, like we're not in danger in the way that we think we are, right? It's like that there is this actual protection for people that are working and wanting to do the divine, expression here on earth as best we can, and bring it active onto the planet as best we can. And so I think that our guardian angels, I think that there are, spiritual forces that, the guide even says wherever there is mass events, that harm a lot of people or something like that. The individuals can be, in protected spaces or have different experiences depending on what their own soul journey was meant to go through.
Mm.
So,
I I
yeah, go
agree
ahead.
with you. I agree kind of with you on that because it is that duality, and it reminds me of it's like we see this world, and there is to me a lot more darkness coming in, but at the same time, a lot of people are waking up, and maybe it's because of the information age and the push with the energies, all of that. So it is this duality going on, like almost side by side, um, and it's kind of having to say which path do I want to choose to view, or which perspective, half empty, half full, and I vacillate. And but it also thinks of I think of when COVID hit, it reminds me of that. Like a lot of people were really, really negatively impacted by COVID, and their life was torn asunder. It didn't really hardly impact me, honestly. I live pretty actually. I live really good, and and probably where I was at the location, but it didn't and most of my family, it didn't really have that much of an impact. And honestly, I think that few years of COVID, I probably made more money than I had in like the last 15 years by not working or getting laid off and losing my job. But even the illness itself and all of that, but then I come across people who their lives were destroyed, they lost a lot of family members. So it was like this duality going on of depending on your reality. And I kind of feel like it's very similar now. It's like, and I do see for a while there, I was like really concerned, like, okay, are we going to end up having war on our country? But then I have to step back and remind myself, well, do, I don't want to see war, period. These are people all over the world. And so it's like trying to find that middle ground to see and have love and try to have light regardless, and also recognize that my spirit chose to come down and reincarnate at this time.
Hmm.
So what lessons am I supposed to learn? What am I and
Yeah.
um I don't think it was to me like really stay in fear, because I had most of my life I grew up in lots of fear and anger, lots of evil. I was perpetuating it. So it's like I'm now that it's no longer, I feel like I'm perpetuating it as much. Now it's like, well, do I want to feel victimized by it, or do I want to figure out how to shed light on it and recognize it for what it is? So that's been a challenge.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it's going to resolve in our lifetimes, and maybe we will have to go through these things as well. And it's like I have to work. For me, I think a lot of it is like you're saying, sort of opening the heart and compassion, or seeing, like, and learning from this, like. And everybody is, it's so interesting to me how, like most people just are reading it and interpreting it through different lenses, right, of what the problem is. And, but it's the same suffering and the same fears and the same, pain that's kind of everywhere. And so I think, that there's a piece that is, like unifying us maybe, through that. And then, I think that the guide says, it's going to be a long time before there aren't any wars, right? And that we are transforming these aspects of ourselves. And the more that we can, the more, and maybe, some grace or miracle will happen, and it will happen sooner. But if it's up to the human just progress with it, I mean, we have made a lot of progress. And I think it's kind of part of all the progress that we made that we are having this backlash, right? Because like humanity is like any human being, where we have multiple aspects of our own self within us, and we have different parts of us. Well, humanity could be seen as one being with all of these different aspects as well. And so it's a matter of integration, right? And especially when we have all of these different perspectives and different ways of viewing things, it's kind of like, and this whole journey of individuation, where we're affirming our own unique viewpoints. It's a transformational time, and we've never done it before. And I think as the planet shrinks and resources and people, are afraid, this is predictable, what is happening in a way, and has been what has happened in the fall of every empire
Mhm.
ever in history, right? We're just it's just the continuation of that. And so I think that we are in this decline in this process, but what is rebirthed out of that is what's part of what we want to do. And so I think how we meet it as and try to spiritualize it, I think that will help us in that journey. But
Plus, I think about there it's like there's these big cycles. So I think humans, we go through these dark periods and light periods and dark, and I think we are traversing on a dark period. And I don't know, depending on which belief we subscribe to, I'm thinking it's probably gonna be like not just a few years, it's probably like 100,000
could
year
be that
cycle.
100,000, yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
ultimately.
like, how many civilizations we're constantly finding evidence of previous civilizations that we thought were the oldest, and now it's like, oh no, this group is older. Oh no, there's these giants now, and it's like, well, where'd they go? And so I just there's a part of that's like that fear wants to kick in, like what's going to happen to us? But at the same time, it's like, well, this is just part of our cycle,
Larger scale,
what we're
yeah.
in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually, I mean, the Pathwork, when it came in, saying this is kind of a reiteration of the basic spiritual understanding for these times. And it kind of indicated that we were moving into a time where much more ultimate positive things could happen on Earth, and that there was a kind of, instead of a dystopian future, that we were here in the process of trying to create, like bringing more spirit, more light, more divine into matter. So we're always divinizing matter in our incarnatory process, and so as we're working with that, to me, that's part of, what I love to think, because I think, the earth is a beautiful, beautiful planet, and I think that the more that we can bring spirit into the earth that way, it's going to help her heal. We're going to maybe even be guided into how we can help, and also how to get along and how to learn to be with each other again, because this journey has been one of individuation and separation, which is was needed, because we didn't need to just be slaves or following the leader. We needed to ignite our own unique spark. But then the problem is, okay, I'm different than you, and how do we get along, or how do we follow my spark or your spark, or and so there's this whole kind of new journey that we're also on. I think in like we went from a tribal culture to basically maybe you know a larger city state, but then it started going into extended family, and then nuclear family, and then part nuclear family, right? Because we just really wanted to not be sort of imposed upon by others. And that was, part of how we threw off the shackles of how the culture wanted us to be so we could be who we were. And the pathwork is really big on don't live what other people think your incarnation is for, or what other people's life other people want you to live your life. It's like our that's our task. But in that, it's also then, and how do we unify and collectively find a way to support each other and care for each other, and all of that. So I'm hoping maybe, I hear you, like the larger cycles of things for sure, but I have a feeling that maybe a little grace and a little miracle might be around the corner for us in some of this. And so that's my prayer, that, there can be an awakening, at least by enough people on the planet, in a collective sense, that will kind of help the balance, and not make it quite as dystopian a journey as it could be in this transition. So
Yeah, it's going to be,
okay,
I think
well,
it's going to be really interesting to see. The,
yeah,
I mean, because I do see it. It's like this big, adventure or roller coaster unfolding,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
used to
yeah.
love roller coasters and haunted houses. I mean, I was crazy about them, and now it's like I'm watching life unfold as that same thing. It's like, oh,
Uh,
we're up high, and now it's terrifyingly low.
good metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I believe in the past lives and reincarnation. I've remembered, uh, I forgot about over 10 past lives, so I realized, it's I'm coming back
Yeah.
and I'm just having these experiences, and it's like, well, when you look at the whole bigger picture, it's like I guess I subscribe to, maybe I'm thinking of it as some type of adventure that I'm just coming down into this cycle to experience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think it
depending
is, and I
upon.
think it also is real enough to, kind of trigger us or challenge us or, work through, a lot of different aspects. But yeah, I think it is. That's a good way to look at it. And then sometimes in that adventure, you're like on that cliff, hanging on with your fingernails and screaming bloody murder. It's part of the experience of the journey, and something maybe that we we'll review in our life review or something, in in the in between times. Okay, well, are we ready to? Let's try it again. Go back and just take a look and just hear some of the cadence of the lecture. We may not be able to get all the way through it. We'll try to end about 9:30, but let's see how far we get. So, greetings, blessings to all my old and new friends here, and welcome to all those who have already made progress in their attempt to find the truth of their innermost being, and to all those who have not yet taken active steps. Your being here signifies a conscious and unconscious search for the real meaning of your lives. Although this lecture is a sequel to the one I gave before the summer recess, it also constitutes a new beginning. It should be as meaningful to work back from it as to go forward. Human beings are continually confronted with the deep problem of how to handle the destructive forces residing within themselves and others. This problem seems unending, for ever since the beginning of human existence, theories and philosophies have been built around it. Your search has always been concerned directly or indirectly with this great issue. All suffering really comes exclusively from one's own destructiveness, negativity, or evil, whatever name you give it. The great difficulty you are up against is that you are trying to solve this problem within the system of duality. You conceive of two opposite forces, a constructive one opposed to a destructive one, good opposed to evil. The moment you become involved in duality, you are unable to solve the problem. You begin to negate, deny, evade, or repress whatever is destructive in you, and then consequently you are partly unaware of your destructiveness and incapable of seeing how it manifests. In other words, you are forced to act out the destructiveness indirectly with damaging results. And thus your guilt compounds because the evil you hope to eliminate only increases when it is repressed and acted out indirectly. It's basically saying, it's like to cover over the evil with a mask, and to, try to be good and never do evil or never be angry or, whatever the, dictate is not really the way to eliminate the evil. It just makes it worse. So in this dualistic approach, you become split within yourself, for you reject a whole part of yourself. That is the source of essential potent creative energy, without which you can never be a full human being. Your sense of awareness dims as you repress the undesirable part of yourself. And the less aware you are, the weaker you become, and therefore more confused and less able to solve this or any other problem. The pathwork is, of course, primarily concerned with facing these undesirable parts in order to remove the self-imposed blindness. You will find again and again that such confrontation, rather than bringing the devastation you fear, wakes up vital energy and makes you a more integrated person. The problem that still remains for all of you, however, is how to cope with the undesirable material that begins to manifest. So this lecture so far is mostly about, where within us, right? And that's where the guide usually does work, but he may address, and does in some of the other lectures as well, the outer conditions. But, in this way, I like it because, I think if nothing else, we can, and I think it is a purification truly of the planet when we do our work. And, it may not stop the evil around us, but it makes us a beacon of light. It makes us a vibration, an illumination of things around us. And I think we have really no idea how powerful that is. I think that that's maybe in some ways the most powerful. And so he says meditation is most important, for without the greater mind, the little mind is unable to bring change. And so this is this connection with what he refers to as usually the higher self. In this case, he's referring to it as the greater mind. The wisdom, the intelligence, that is who we are, a spark of, but is also who we are connected to and can access, right? And we need that. So it's also necessary for us to have clear concepts and outlines. And so our work can also be to apply, our understanding as best we can and to try to develop sort of our awareness. Your mental concepts must be more accurate, aligned with truth. Otherwise, false ideas or even vagueness will create a block. And that's part of what we're running into, in the outer realm too. Is there's a lot of false ideas or, confusions and inaccuracies that are just out there. So, if, for example, you conceive of the greater intelligence within you as having a power to make the destructive force disappear, your meditation and request for help will remain unanswered. So, like if you're just meditating or praying, requesting, like to just, have something lift these things, he says that's probably not the right prayer to make, right? Any vague and hazily misconceived process will set up a stumbling block. Most religions take a dualistic approach to the great question of evil, seeing it as a force opposed to good. The dualistic approach reinforces your fear of yourself and your guilt. Therefore, it only increases the chasm within your soul. The energies of fear and guilt are used to force yourself to be good. The blindness, compulsion, and artificial concept of life that accompany this forcing create self-perpetuating patterns with many negative ramifications. And I think it's kind of like this part that also then tries to force others outside of us, right? So, there's that side too, there's like, the destructiveness of somebody like Trump, but then there's also these forces that are, following him in a sense, because he has power and he can, act and, control and force, right? And so the blindness, compulsion, and artificial concept of life that accompany this forcing create the self-perpetuating patterns with many negative ramifications. On the other hand, there are also philosophies which postulate that evil just does not exist. It is an illusion. This philosophy is as true as its religious opposite, which recognizes the danger of evil, its life-defeating power, and the unhappiness and suffering it brings. The postulate that evil is an illusion is true in the sense that there is innately only one great creative power. There is union, for all is one in the consciousness of those who have transcended duality. As is so often true, both of these opposing teachings express great truths, but the exclusiveness with which they are conceived and perpetuated ultimately render their truth untrue. So, like, again, when we go into this polarizing thing, right, the denial of evil as a reality leads to wishful thinking, further blindness, and the denial of the self, It decreases rather than increases awareness. A false picture of reality is created, the reality of the present state of humankind. And so, even back then, there was a way that, we mostly saw ourselves, as good and progressive. The other people were the bad ones. But so I recapitulate: to not deny evil on humanity's present plane of consciousness is as unrealistic as to believe that two separate forces exist, one good and one evil. Such a belief implies that the evil force must be destroyed or whisked away, as if anything could be made to disappear in the universe. You must struggle between these two alternatives to find the answers. This lecture is an attempt to help you. Both views of evil lead to repression. Yet acknowledging evil also leads to the possibility of further destructiveness. It might lead to justifying and condoning truly undesirable things, such as self-righteous acting out, which, I can point a finger in my direction, right? In such a case, it is the guilt that would be repressed, creating further splitting and duality. So, when I'm not conscious and want to deny that self-righteous acting out, and, yeah, it's their fault, not mine, right? And then, that's repressing my own guilt and creating further splitting and duality. So let's try to find a way to deal with this problem that can avoid either one of these pitfalls. Let's try to reconcile these two general approaches to evil. You have all experienced how threatened, anxious, and uncomfortable you feel when you are confronted with some of your undesirable attitudes, traits, and characteristics. And that's when we mostly become defensive, right? And it can be even implied. And and maybe the person isn't really doing that, because we project it even, that people are, confronting us because internally we're still split and we have confusion. And this reaction must be understood in a deeper way. Too much is taken for granted and glossed over by simply giving the reaction a name and then letting go at that. The meaning of such fearful, uncomfortable, anxious reaction is plainly an expression that says, such and such should not exist in me. Or we could even say in others, right? All the defenses you have so painstakingly erected serve to protect you, not only from the evil of others, but primarily from your own. If you examine the cause each time you feel anxious, you will always find that in the last analysis, you are apprehensive of your own evil, regardless of how threatening another person or an outside event appears. So that might be an interesting little, meditation to try. I mean, I can see, in the obvious place, like, no, I can't find that in me, but I always find that going a little deeper, and maybe looking at it from a slightly different angle can help, discover that, and it's useful because it's like there is always this way that we're sort of like the guide even says, like we often say, I don't distrust somebody. And the guide is saying, basically that's really saying, I don't trust myself to handle what the other person might do. So ultimately, it's the distrust of our own capacity as much as it is a distrust of the other person might act out or do something. So when we can, like have a trust in ourselves in life, and have this kind of grounded, presencing and that I think, allows the movement of life to flow in the highest possible timeline, that, that is, kind of what we're working towards, and also, shows us, right, that there's this way through the duality. So if you examine the cause each time you feel anxious, you will always find that in the last analysis you are apprehensive of your own evil. If you translate this anxiety into clear-cut words, thus verbalizing your inner thought that certain attitudes or feelings should not exist in me, You can then confront your attitude toward evil in a much better way, for the evil itself is not half as damaging as your attitude to it. We shall come back to this later. From now on, instead of habitually evading, which breeds emotional illness, problems, and suffering, catch your fear and the thought behind the fear. Remember, the guide's saying the fear is part of the lower self. I should not be that way. If this fear is ignored, the problem becomes worse. So this is kind of like, again, our inner critic, our inner, ISI, our part that's always judging us. And it's hard for us to find our connection with our higher self and the calm when we have all of that going on. So in some sense, to me, in my journey, that was the first thing that had to get healed. And it took a long time. It's kind of like ingrained in ourselves and in our culture. And still, has remnants. But I think there is this way that if we can look at and understand how our own self-judgment works against ourselves, we may also see how we can ultimately apply that to our brothers and sisters as well. And the more that we can understand and see ourselves clearly, and open our hearts to ourselves, and have the humility to be imperfect in ourselves, the more we can also extend that grace to other people. So our aim on this path is precisely the knowing and acceptance of the evil. The word acceptance has been used a great deal for lack of a better one, but the meaning often gets lost behind the word, so we must pay more attention to how this acceptance comes about. For only when acceptance occurs in the right way can evil be incorporated and reformed in the truest sense of the word. You can then transform a force that has gone awry. Most human beings totally forget or ignore the fact that what is worst in them is essentially highly desirable, creative power, and universal flow and energy. And only when you truly realize this, my friends, will you learn to cope with every aspect of yourself. So, it's hard sometimes, to, again, extend this out to our enemies. But I think it's always worth, the exploration and the effort, so to, see really what is worst in them, is essentially something that is creative power and universal life force and energy. And again, it has gone awry, but its essence. And so, this is where maybe a discernment can be made, so much in the distortion and less in the essence of each individual. Almost all human beings, with very, very few exceptions, cope with only a small part of themselves. They accept, know, and only want to know a relatively small part of their total personality. And I think this is getting even more as we're opening into multidimensionality and other aspects of ourselves, that I think really the longer we're here on earth, the more our self is incarnating, if it can, and the more we're clearing out stuff, the more our higher self comes into this life. So this limitation of, only having a small part of our total personality that we understand and know and identify with, right, is a limitation and a terrible loss. Not being aware of that within, which is undesirable in its present manifestation, shuts them off from what is already clear, liberated, purified, and good. So if we deny and repress certain aspects of us, it blocks the divine aspects of us. And it also prevents most individuals from loving and respecting themselves because they have no real perception of their divine heritage. So most people, not the narcissists of this world, but most people are kind of lost in a reverse narcissism, and a feeling of inadequacy and unworthiness. And so in this unworthiness, it's this part of this, lack of perception of their true divine heritage. Their actual already manifest goodness seems unreal, even important and fundamental. But what is even more important and fundamental is that shutting off this undesirable part causes it to remain stagnant and paralyzed so that it cannot change. The price of recognizing and accepting the destructive evil aspect of the self seems high, but it really is not. By contrast, the price of denying it is enormous. You may grope in confusion until you find a way to accept your destructive impulses and desires without condoning them, to understand them without identifying with them. You must learn to evaluate such impulses and desires realistically without falling into the trap of projection, self-justification, self-righteous exoneration, while blaming others on the one hand or on the other of self-indulgence, denial, repression, and evasion. Such understanding requires continual inspiration from the higher forces within and deliberate requests for help in awakening and maintaining awareness of these destructive aspects and of the proper method to handle them. So let me pause here for a minute. Any comments or questions? Feel free to break in too, but so are you relating, like he's mostly talking in this lecture right now anyway about our own sort of judgment of our own evil, or our, hiding in our fear of ourselves in our lower self. So does anybody, or where are we at in our own lives in that place? Do you still feel like you have a part of you that makes you feel inadequate or unworthy, or, as we're looking at the rest of the world, we might be feeling a little better about ourselves these days. Maybe that's something that is of value. I don't know. But I know we all have carried a lot of our own inner critic with us. So where's our inner critic these days?
I'm trying to become more aware of it. Because I still do a lot of beating up on myself.
Yeah.
But I went through a dark night of the soul some years ago, and I had to kind of come to terms with my dark side, and looking at that, what I was capable of in the bad sense, and I did find a lot of peace through all of that part. But now I'm dealing with like the mind chatter of the self-deprecation and like low self-esteem, and it's like I'm working on just being aware, like where is that coming from, and just trying to create some space and step back and listen to the mind chatter and observe versus trying to judge it or stop it or whatever, just trying to create that space like the cloud in the sun, just looking at it. And it's real interesting because yeah,
Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, I think that is, and I think that's what the guide is suggesting. And then this is the other week, next Wednesday, we will do some of this where we just, we practice this thing called focusing in a relation, where we are just noticing maybe even our mind thoughts, but also how those thoughts affect and feel energetically in our body, where we hold tension or anxiety or, these kinds of things. And so it's kind of like understanding all of these as aspects of ourselves, and then sort of noticing. So I notice something in me wants my attention, right? And then we go pay attention and learn and listen and hang out with it for a while. And we have to do that. Oftentimes we notice these parts of us that need our attention, but then we immediately say, oh, that's bad, or that shouldn't be, or, we reject it, or we make it, a problem. And instead of just like, this process doesn't make it right or wrong, good or bad. It just acknowledges that it's there, right? And that seems to be a very integrative kind of simple practice that we can do that allows things to, feel not so much at war internally, because it's where we're split, and kind of one part of us says you're bad, and another part of us is saying I can't be bad, I have to, or justifying itself, or, so we're in these tangles and these parts of us that are in this internal conflict. And that's also part of what is getting projected out, because usually there's one part of us that we're identified with, and then the other part is sort of part of the shadow. And then we will also recognize it outside of ourselves and have to, try to work with it from there. But it's, yeah, this inner voice, this inner critic, it is the more we can understand, because, often underneath this fear, remember, I used to have a terrible, terrible inner critic, and it would, kind of knock me out and make me depressed, and I couldn't function for sometimes weeks at a time, sometimes longer. But, as I was getting better, it was kind of like I was noticing these patterns, and, it was like I would kind of collapse, and then I would, be unhappy at myself for the collapse, and it would be just like a vicious circle. And it almost felt like there was some kind of part of me that was like had fangs and was just chomping into me because it was so unhappy with this kind of stuckness, and lostness in this. And it was when I began to see and get curious. Oh, look, this part of me is terrified and is, it's like an infant with fangs, and it's trying to get my attention, and it's in pain. And when I could stop identifying it with it, either resisting it or merging with it, and become the consciousness that could simply be aware of it and be curious about it and acknowledge it, that began to, allow things to move and integrate in a simpler fashion. And it also allowed, instead of like the inner parts of me constantly dealing with my critic, now they're dealing with this part of me that is more connected to my higher self, my objective observer, my compassion, my openness, and my curiosity, right? And so we're sort of invoking that aspect, compassion, curious, open consciousness, to notice all of these other parts within us and simply, turn to them and listen and learn more. You know, another way I call that is sort of an act of deep listening and soul whispering, right? And that brings us into a union, a communion with all of our parts. And
Yeah, one of the ways, I kind of a quick way that I can gauge where I'm at, spiritually and in alignment with the source, is how I react when I'm driving. If someone drives and does something crazy, if I just get out the way or just slow down, I'm fine. But if there's commentary in my mind, or if I feel like honking, then I know that I'm out of alignment, because I notice when I'm at peace, I just move and let them do their thing.
yeah,
But as soon as I get a little frustrated, even if they like do something really like shocking, like it could almost cause an accident, if I'm at peace, it's like I don't even feel that much fear or anything. It's just kind of just a calm, like get out the way, or it's okay. But if I'm not at peace, I'm like, what are they doing? And all
right.
that. And the good news is I don't really cuss anymore at them like I would and honk my horn real loud. But still, I'm not all the way there. So it kind of teaches me like, okay,
Right,
that's a quick spiritual check for me.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, good example. Frank, anything more on your end?
Um, it's interesting what Doretha just said. It's sort of like being in this frame of mind where you can let other people have their distortions without getting upset with them, you know, which is really difficult for me to do. I'm in the same way. If I'm get behind somebody who's just like not driving with any real awareness, at least it seems that way to me. It's everything I can do to keep from honking the horn, you know? I just want people to wake up.
Yep. I want to lay on the horn.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard to let people have their distortions and not be upset with it. You know?
And yet, I think that it's a good way to put it, Frank, because I'll let you finish. I'm sorry, but I think that really is the one thing that, we can refine within us and can make a difference in our own lives and maybe in the world.
Yeah.
It seems like a little thing. It
All
seems
we can
totally
do is
understandable, but yeah. Go ahead. What was the question?
all we can do is refine ourselves.
Hmm.
It just
Hmm.
doesn't seem like we have the ability to change the world. I mean, I know we'd like to, it's an altruistic thing to say. We can change the world, but we've been evolving for millions of years and we still put Donald Trump in power. So what have we evolved to?
I have to admit that I voted for Donald Trump, so I'm saying, but but I find that so it made me think of twice this week because I have to now drive. I don't work from home as much, so we have to go in downtown to Detroit, which is very busy, and on the freeway. And at 8 a.m. we have to be there, right? And a couple of times this week, somebody hadn't moved when the stoplight was go, and they're just sitting there. And I actually, instead of me honking, I just sat there. Instead of saying, "Come on, don't you see the light?" or I just sat there and just chilled, and like in total peace. It was just like I didn't care. It was gonna go or not. It's fine. And I thought that was interesting because normally it's like, get out the way. Don't you see the light? You need to turn. You need to move. But which I found it was nice to have that peace and say, I'm
Right,
okay. I'm just enjoying being.
right.
Yeah.
And I think it is, like I get what you're saying too, Frank, but I think there is a way that when we can shift and be in calm, can be in peace, can maintain that state, um, that that does affect the field, the universal field that we're in. And other people will feel that. I mean, we're always communicating telepathically and through resonance and stuff like that with our energy field. And so, everybody, it's going to help them for sure, holding that, working, building that muscle, or however, it is that we can learn to um, transform within ourselves and hold that state. But I do believe that it can transform the world. We aren't going to do it by politics or by, you know, certain slogans or anything like that. But I think in our way of being, and in our vibrational stance in the world, that enough of us holding a space like that will, eventually make a difference. And it will certainly, like, we're talking about, make a difference in our own lives, right? It's like what one of the ways that sort of the shamanic understanding of these things is this, that the provocations, like the negative pleasure, is what the guide would say, that we get out of being outraged at somebody else's stupid behavior, right? Is kind of like, it's a way to feed the archons. It's a way to feed the dark forces of energy in the astral. And they are actually intentionally sort of feeding us to provoke, to get into that provocative state, or that provoked state, because they get juice from it. They can steal our juice that way. So they want to get us activated and all, negative and like that. And that feeds them. And so that, I believe, is also another way that, by our learning a deeper level of sort of maintaining this place of inner peace and calm, that we can change the world. Because when they're not fed, they eventually kind of, you know, are leaving, or starve to death, or die off, or I don't know what happens. But, I think they exist because we're feeding them to a great extent. And that's what we're seeing a lot in the world right now. They're having a heyday.
You, you know, it dawned on me. So I moved. I bought a home in the past like 10 days or so. I moved, and my move has been the worst move I've ever had with paying movers, and such that only half of my stuff got moved, and they took the other half of my items, and a lot of those items that they took was like my prepper stuff, my emergency food, all of those
Oh
things like the war,
no.
and it was other things like most of my clothes and all of that. And the thing is, it's been like 10 days, I think now, and I just haven't. I would think that I should be mad and all of that, but I realized that I would like the stuff back, but I don't feel like getting into the chaos right now of it. And I actually feel a sense like if I don't get it back and all of that, it's okay. Whereas it's so different, but I realized it was because that's all of that stuff that I was preparing with fear. And those things cost a lot of money, 32-year shelf life food and all of that stuff at
Yeah,
Western
yeah.
Farm. Yeah, I was really buying and stocking up and canning. And then there's other things there, but I realized this group here that maybe because that was that fear part. And it's like, well, whatever happens, happens. And I'll just follow whatever steps I'm supposed to, but I'm not like freaking out. And everybody around me, my friends and family, are like, "What?" And when I tell them, it was just they damaged my home, my new roof, all of this back then. I mean, it was just a really not a good thing. But it's just like, what am I going to do when it had some bad storms here in Michigan a few days ago, and they had squished my gutter, and I'm watching this beautiful waterfall just pour down on my front porch, and I'm thinking, I wonder if that's getting in the basement or something, But at the same time, it's like I'm going to do what I can do, but I don't want to live in that anger. Like my old way would have been like, hold on to anger. I got to get them. I'm going to sue them. I'm going to do it. But I just don't feel like I don't want to have that energy because I do feel like there's so much already going on in the world and I don't want to feed into that and I sure don't want to become enmeshed into it. Like I feel like what you said, the archons, they'll stick their tongues in me or something, be just sucking and feeding off, and I don't want to feed them. I want to keep my own light, or I don't want to feed the that.
and
So
and that's and that's where we have our power, in some ways, is like in our choice, in our free will choice, right? And I can even align with you, but I'm not as firm in you yet, because it's like I'm going to get tempted into the other thing until I, firm my, like I really don't want to do, but there is this way that, and then maybe you're able to hold, under this provocation and temptation, which seems like a pretty extreme one for sure, and then, something little will come up and totally trigger you, right? I find that
so
happens
true.
a bit for me as well, like the big ones. Oh, okay, it's like this is so big, I'm gonna like surrender to it. I can't do
Yeah.
anything else, right?
And then I go to Walmart and there's a super long line and the
Right.
cash is slow or the machine breaks. Then I'm like, ah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is, it's through these experiences that we are simply learning. It is just a learning curve, and it is the way life is transforming us, through its operations and our experiences within it, and then our ability to, experience it and then say, well, what do I want, or how can I, you know, go for a deeper experience, or what's more true, or whatever, more peace. Okay, well, let's see if we got a few more minutes here. Let's see if we can finish a little more of the lecture. How are you doing with the lecture? Are you enjoying the guide's words? Able to follow? Okay.
I like them.
All righty. So let's see. Um, I think I'll just start. I think we're on this paragraph here. Whenever you are in an unpleasant mood, a threatening situation, confusion, and darkness, you can be sure that regardless of the outer circumstances, the problem arises from denial and fear of your own destructive attitudes and your ignorance about how to handle them. And so again, like when we're just sitting in this open space of acceptance and sort of waiting to see how spirit will, bring all of this to a close, like I mean, like I find if I start interfering, that maybe makes it worse. And if I can be in this place of sort of surrender and acceptance, then oftentimes maybe some of it'll come back to you, or something else will, you know, uh, positively result, as you're allowing spirit to find its way through this crisis, this mess, right? And you're not in your reactive state. So the guide has another lecture on the spiritual meaning of crisis, which may apply here as well. Like there's reasons, as of course, that these things are happening, and a lot of times I think they are like temptations, to test us, to see, and as we practice and we feel, oh, I did that, and then we don't do it the next, like that's all the learning curve. So admitting this brings immediate relief, admitting, that all of this is coming from our own internal, work here, uh, and deactivates the negative powers almost instantly. Learn by what steps you can incorporate this power rather than shut it off. So again, we don't we can make a discernment that we would rather be in peace than be all upset and feeding the archons, but we don't want to go into sort of a judgmental fear or denial of those destructive attitudes. So if they're arising in us, then it's like we don't want to turn against ourselves or turn against them inside of us. But obviously, if we can not act them out and not collude with them, it's better. But to suppress them or deny them or make them wrong, or to put a judgment of shame or guilt on top of us for them, doesn't serve the transformation. It just kind of buries them deeper and makes them more active in the unconscious. So admitting this brings immediate relief and deactivates the negative powers almost instantly. So the first step must be applying the theory that destructiveness or evil is not a final separate force. You must think about this not merely in general philosophic terms. Rather, you must take the specific aspect of yourself that makes you feel guilty and afraid, and apply this knowledge to all that is most distasteful in yourself and others. So here he's kind of offering a little exercise here. So if you want to take a minute and try to explore it. So see if you can find the aspect of yourself that makes you feel guilty and afraid. And no matter how ugly some of these manifestations are, whether it be cruelty, spite, arrogance, contempt, selfishness, indifference, greed, cheating, or something else, you can bring yourself to realize that every one of these traits is an energy current originally good and beautiful and life-affirming. So see if you can find, like, what's your biggest fault, that you're aware of, or, somebody else's fault even, and what would be the original positive, higher self, good, beautiful, life-affirming trait, the guide is saying that the evil comes from the distortion, the blocking of the natural flow of energy and consciousness. And so, if we have arrogance, like, what would its higher self or its divine quality be that it came from in a distorted way? Does that make sense? And the same thing, like, cruelty, spite, or selfishness. All of those have, higher divine positive aspects within. So anybody see one that comes up? I can make a stab at some of them, but so like greed, like, I think, its higher self aspect is, and maybe some Buddhist things would say, maybe that's not higher self, but desire in Western spirituality, is a divine aspect. Without desire, nothing. It's what calls us into life. It's what brings us forward, right? And so it's a positive thing that we want, that we're seeking, that we're enjoying and liking, certain things. And so that can come into addiction and greed and all kinds of levels of distorted desire, right? Indifference, it's can have a, like, again, non-attachment would be a divine indifference, right, in the Buddhist understanding of things. But in its negative manifestation, it is this, it is a fuck you, a separation, a cruelty. And so, there's a way that I think it's useful to remember and to try to realize, especially the ones that we find in ourselves, because it is a part of our divine nature and a part of our own divine qualities, that rather than suppressing and denying and rejecting, it simply needs to be purified and returned to its original divine nature. By searching in this direction, you will come to understand and experience how this or that specific hostile impulse was originally a good force. When you understand that, you will have made a substantial inroad towards transforming the hostility and freeing the energy that has either been channeled in a truly undesirable destructive way or become frozen and stagnant. It's kind of like we either merge with this stuff and act it out, or we resist it and try to suppress it and deny it and freeze it. And neither of those options allow it to grow and change, right? Transformation requires the movement, but we can't just identify with it and merge with it and act it out, So this is part of what we're trying to do again, is find this balance, this non-dual approach to things. So articulate clearly the insight that these ugly traits, whatever they may be, are a power that can be used any way you wish. This power, the same energy that may now manifest as hostility, envy, hatred, rage, bitterness, self-pity, or blame, can become a creative power to build happiness, pleasure, love, expansion for yourself and others around you. The list of negative traits could be extended, but that is unnecessary, for they are, where to go? For they are only variations on the same theme. You all know these things in yourself, or at least you have begun to know them. Still, after all this time, it is not yet possible for any of you to truly understand what you dislike most in yourself is essentially a highly desirable creative power. You dislike it because it is not desirable in the form it manifests at the moment. In other words, you have to learn to acknowledge that the way the power manifests is undesirable, but the energy current behind this manifestation is desirable in itself, for it is made of life stuff, of the life stuff itself. It contains consciousness and creative energy. It contains every possibility to manifest and express life, to create new life. It contains all the best of life as you experience it, and much more. So too, the best of life that has revealed itself to you contains the possibility of the very worst. If you can envision the possibilities of all life manifestations, because life is a continuous, flowing, moving, ongoing process, you can never become fixated on finalities, which create error, confusion, and duality. So, that helps me a lot of times, is to find the place of not knowing. It's like it looks like it's going this way, but I don't know where it's going, and it may go that way, and then it may go on beyond that way, or it may something else come out of that, right? And I have my projections or my fears or my expectations, and then those are often what get me into trouble. So when we become fixed on the finalities, that is what create error, confusion, and duality. So that's, I think, another useful part of this, is just to kind of really see the whole thing in a flow, like a river or like a moving thing, and if you're in one place currently, like you can thrash around and try to swim upstream, or but that's only going to tire you, and it's probably better to just put your feet downstream and relax into the current and let the current carry you. And that'll be the easiest and simplest way through whatever the crisis or the discomfort or the difficulty is. So you will see that by denying the evil in you, you do greater harm to the whole of your personality, to your manifest spirituality, than you realize. For by denying it, you inactivate an essential part of your energies and creative forces. And so you can't use them, and they stagnate. And from stagnation, putrefaction follows. Matter putrefies when it stagnates, when it can no longer move. The same is true of consciousness. It putrefies when it stagnates. Life is a continuously flowing process. When it stands still, death temporarily manifests. Since life is eternal, the death can be only temporary. This applies not only to human beings, to entities, but also to matter and energy. As long as the energy flow is arrested, death takes place and lasts until the energy flow is released again. This is the manifestation, and yet another meaning of death on this plane of consciousness. The principle also applies to an object. When it rots or disintegrates, the energy within it has been arrested, This arrested energy must at some point start flowing again. And so it breaks down that particular manifestation and frees itself in a way. Matter is always a condensation and manifestation of consciousness and energy. The way the energy flows or does not flow, and the form it takes when it condenses, depends on the attitude of consciousness behind, or rather intrinsic, to a particular aspect of creation. So this kind of also, I think, touches a little bit on our understanding that's increasing on of quantum mechanics and how, really it takes the consciousness to collapse the probability cloud to create the reality, right? And so, and what our consciousness is doing is going to depend on how it collapses and what manifests out of that. So by the same token, destructiveness is another erroneous form of consciousness. It must lead either directly through acting out and giving it direct expression, or indirectly through denial, that is stagnation, to a negation of life. This is why some supposedly negative emotions are actually desirable. For instance, anger can further life and be directed against the negation of life. And that's, I think, a lot of it's what you were saying, Frank, is like, this anger is justified. It's against the negation of life, right? And and so denial of anger turns into hostility, cruelty, spite, self-hate, guilt, confusion between blame of others and blame of self. And I find that that happens more than we know, maybe. And it's thus a destructive energy current. So death will become superfluous, will be overcome when energy is no longer stagnant, when it is allowed to move. This can happen on the level of mind first, when evil is understood to be intrinsically a divine energy flow and momentarily distorted due to specific wrong ideas, concepts, and perceptions. Thus, it is no longer rejected in its essence, but assimilated. We use the word integrated a lot now these days, and I think it's an important word. This is precisely what you find most difficult to do. In fact, you find it so difficult that you tend to forget even those aspects in you which are already free of distortion, evil, and destructiveness, that are already liberated and clear, that are good and beautiful and divine. All your striving and goodwill is beautiful. Even your pangs of conscience, notwithstanding the misplaced guilt, spring from the best and most beautiful manifestations of consciousness. You will deny, ignore, fail to experience this best in you as long as you deny, ignore, and fail to experience the evil in you. You distort your concept of yourself when you deny any part of yourself, no matter how ugly it may be in its present form. The essential key to totally integrating the evil is understanding its original nature and the indwelling possibility that it may manifest again in its original divine form. This must be the aim, my friends. As long as you try to become good by denying evil, by forcing yourself to be what you cannot yet be, what you can in fact never be, you remain in a painful state of inner split, partial self-denial, and paralysis of vital forces within you. I say what you can never be, because if your expectation is to destroy or magically whisk away a vital part of yourself, and not to accept the intrinsic desirability of all the creative energy contained in even your most destructive aspects, you cannot become whole. Cultivate this altered attitude. And in my own mind, I'm thinking, yeah, and it's also true. Even, I think maybe in some ways, we hired, Trump to be the destructive force in the universe. Like in some ways, these things are manifesting out of the whole, and have a part to play. Are in some way undesirable, but maybe in another way. Like if we stop just resisting and totally rejecting and sort of trust that somehow if they are here, God's will is also active in this, that these are the times that we are coming into that will take us down the current, down the stream into the greater state that we're trying to get to. And somehow all of this shaking and loss of everything that we've ever known as good and right and beautiful, in some ways is a part of what's needing to happen. And we don't fully understand why or, where it's going to come out. But I think, it is part of that to do that integration. So the new attitude of acceptance does not mean condoning, excusing, or rationalizing our own or others' undesirable aspects. Quite the contrary. We can fully acknowledge them. It's like give honest expression without finding excuses or blaming others, but not feeling hopeless and self-rejecting about them either. And so this seems like a tall order, but it is certainly possible to acquire this attitude if you make a sincere effort and truly pray that guidance be given to you for this very purpose. And so if we can come into a sort of less critical and blaming and judgmental kind of relationship with our own negativity, I think, even though we see the hurt, the cruel, like there's a lot of compassion, a lot of pain in endings and destructiveness and, you know, uh, the winter, is part of the medicine wheel, right? It's like everything has to die. And so there's these stages of life, um, great geological epochs that, change things, in climate and that sort of thing that, are destructive. And yet out of that destructiveness, the new thing is created. Out of the death, a new life is born. So when we can see that directly more in ourselves, I think it helps us deal with it out in the world a little more. When you no longer negate your ugliness, you will no longer have to negate your beauty. There is so much beauty in every one of you that is already free. You actually manifest beauty that you totally negate, ignore, and fail to perceive and experience. And I do not mean only potential, as yet to be developed beauty. I mean beauty that is really present, that we don't even know in ourselves. I often, am in a state maybe of just presencing of other people's radiance. And it's one of my favorite places to, be with people in, because it's just this naturally heart open space that, sees them in their totality, and yet all you see is beauty. All you see is the light in that person. And so, I mean, these are, people that, are also expressing their beauty and radiating that beauty, to some degree. But it's a great blessing, just to recognize this. And I think, we always see it in each other more than we see it in ourselves, more easily than we see it in ourselves. You can think of this and pray for awareness as you pray for awareness of ugliness. You can perceive both, not just one, exclusive of the other. I like to say, I'm a child of God and I'm a total mess. Right? It's like to claim the light and the divinity and also, accept with humility, the ridiculous and funny and, limited and ignorant and sometimes, harmful aspects of my being. So this is enabling us to integrate what now tears us asunder. If we can just, sort of stand on both legs, being both our divinity and our beauty, and also our imperfections, our becomingness. We're learning how to become more and more like God, and in that becoming, we have a long way to go, and yet in our very being, we are that nature. By keeping both your beauty and your ugliness in mind at all times, you will also see both sides in others. You tend to completely reject and negate people whose destructiveness you perceive, and react to them exactly as you do toward yourself. Or you emotionally react to their goodness and inner beauty while unrealistically overlooking their ugly side. You cannot yet grasp the presence of duality in yourself, and therefore neither can you see it in others. This creates conflicts and strife. Only by accepting the duality can you truly transcend it. No expansion of consciousness, no integration and transcendence is possible when consciousness is dimmed, when awareness is blocked. Awareness of the evil must be blocked off when it is viewed as if it were totally unacceptable. When you fail to realize that evil is only a distortion of a divine creative power current, such distortion and lack of awareness cause you to deny and paralyze the creative process itself. Every once in a while, I refer back to the main sources of distortion and destructiveness: self-will, pride, and fear. Offhand, it may appear odd to claim that these three traits are more responsible for evil than the evil traits themselves, including spite, cruelty, envy, hostility, selfishness. How can pride, self-will, or fear be more destructive than, say, hate? The answer to such questions is really simple. The overtly destructive attitudes are never the real evil. If you truly acknowledge them, you remain in the flow. The greatest hatred, the most spiteful vindictiveness, the worst impulse of cruelty, if honestly and squarely admitted, neither acted out irresponsibly nor repressed and denied, but fully accepted, will never become harmful. To the degree that they are seen, faced, and admitted, such feelings will diminish in intensity and must sooner or later convert into flowing, life-giving energy. Hate will turn into love, cruelty into healthy aggression, and self-assertion, stagnation into joy and pleasure. This is inevitable. What I say is no mere theory. Many of you have experienced this conversion of emotions whenever you chance to hit upon the right blend of self-acceptance. But you have to grope for this realization again and again until it becomes second nature and is no longer forgotten. When you blindly and self-righteously act out destructiveness, you do express evil. By denying its existence, you stagnate vital creative energy which putrefies in you. I think eventually becomes our illnesses. By squarely recognizing the evil, you neither act it out nor deny it, and this releases your creative energy flow. Pride, self-will, and fear are all forms of denial, and are therefore more dangerous than the evils they deny. My friends on the path have experienced how true this is. To the degree evil is properly faced, self-acceptance, self-liking, new energy, and deeper love and pleasure ensue. But pride, self-will, and fear make this healing attitude difficult, if not impossible. Self-will is too bent upon its own insistence that it is unwilling to accept present reality. And I run into that in myself as all the time. It's like I'm, when I see it clearly, I'm, like I'm totally at war with reality. That's a good war. How's that going for me? So, but and so he's saying, it's like it kind of they have a force of their own. They get stuck in these places, and it's a little more difficult even than to transform the true aspects of evil, the denial of it. But it fails because it is impossible to grow out of something one is too self-willed to admit. Self-will creates rigidity, and rigidity is contrary to the flow of life. Self-will says, I do not accept reality as it is now. It must be my way, and I insist that it is. This attitude makes admission of the momentary truth impossible. And, Trump has a lot of self-will, as another example, but then so do I. So, so we're always sort of angling and manipulating and, causing, also, harm to others, to get our own way, right? Pride says, I do not want to have any such ugly traits in me. Truth, however, requires both flexibility and humility. So pride and shame are sort of the flip side of the two coins there, and the true unified place in the middle is this humility, flexibility and humility. It also requires courage. And then fear assumes that acceptance and acknowledgement of the ugliness will make that ugliness overwhelming. So fear also denies the justified faith in the benign order of creation. So fear is in denial of the justified faith in the benign order of creation. And I think that that's an interesting thing, and that's a part of like, where do we build our faith from, and how do we deepen in that justified faith in the benign order of creation? And again, through our experiences and through the, ways that we're sure that it's going to, end terribly, and maybe it does better than that, or we, see the divine intervention in some ways that we, needed, and it was grace, right? Or we, open to that flow, and let go of our control, and we see the mystery of the universe unfolding, in ways that we could never even imagine, but it took us really to even a better place than we were trying to get to on our own, right? So it's a long view. The guide says it's very hard because we're like looking through a keyhole, and we're only seeing a little piece of what's coming, what is in each section, and so we can't see the larger perspective that would help us truly have a faith in that reality. And so we have to kind of like use our philosophical understanding until we can keep proving it to ourselves enough that we embody it. And I think a lot of what we're doing is just kind of repeating all of these lessons over and over and over again until every cell in our body, every atom of our existence kind of firms in it, understands it, grasps it in this deep, deep level. And so that's part of why it feels like we're constantly redoing these, here I am again, here I am again, But I think that it's kind of what it takes to really embody it completely. We can know it, and the mind thinks, well, why am I not doing it because I know it already? But we're not embodying it fully. And until we do, then once we do, I think it becomes our nature, our second habit. It's just how we are. But until then, it's a get it, a lose it, and a get it again kind of experience. And in that process, we're building a muscle, we're establishing a capacity. So to give up self-will does not diminish the free spirit of self-expression. Neither does it diminish your genuine dignity when you give up the pride that hides the evil. So yeah, humility, dignity and humility. I really like that phrase, and the guide uses it in, I think there's a lecture entitled, dignity and humility. So it's kind of like, we confuse somehow humility with humiliation and shame. And that's the opposite, like pride and shame are really just the same coin. And they're kind of built on a sort of sense of specialness somehow. And so again, we have to let go of being exceptional and just become equal with everybody. But in that equality, we're an amazing miracle. We're a unique, one of the only time, ever existence self here now doing this. So, again, that idea of, our divinity and our humanity unifying and allowing ourselves to be both. It is never a destructive impulse that presents the real damage and harm, but always the attitude toward it. This is why people who incorporate and accept their negative aspects find to their immense surprise, the contrary of their apprehensive expectation. Their self-respect and self-liking will increase. So the more we see ourselves as we really are, and don't want to hide from ourselves and find this place of humility, the more we see the good parts, and, and have this kind of self-respect and self-liking in spite of our imperfections. So this is, my friends, what we have to learn. A lot of ground must still be covered by every one of you, even though the words sound all too familiar. So far, you are nowhere near actually putting these words into effect. The more you do, the more joy will increase in your life, the more instrumental you will become in shaping your future, not through ego control, but through your real capacity to create with the life energy at your disposal. The key is learning to encounter the destructive force so that you can transform it back to its original nature, thus incorporating it into your whole being. So there's a little Q&A here. As this lecture says, there are things in me that I feel are wrong, evil, yet I enjoy them. They feel pleasurable. But then I feel guilty. For instance, I overspend money. I negate that aspect of myself completely. Can you help me? Answer: this is a good example. I hope to hear many more personal problems like this so I can help you specifically with them. Now, what you describe is so typical. You negate everything about your destructive impulse. You are thus confronted with an insoluble predicament. Either you give up all pleasure connected with overspending and irresponsibility in order to become decent, mature, realistic, self-responsible, and safe, or you take pleasure from the negative trait but at the tremendous cost of guilt, self-deprivation, insecurity, and fear of not being able to run your own life. Once you see that behind the compulsion to overspend and be irresponsible is a legitimate yearning for pleasure, expansion, and new experience, this predicament will cease to exist. In other words, you must incorporate the essence of this wish without acting out the destructiveness of it. You will then have much less difficulty putting the wish into effect in a realistic way that will not defeat you in the end. You are now stuck in battling with one of these typical either-or problems. How can you really want to give up irresponsibility if responsibility implies living on a narrow margin of pleasure and confining your self-expression? You do not really want to give up the irresponsibility. Since you do not really want to give up the irresponsibility and all of this good stuff, right? You feel guilty. And thus you reject that vital part of you which rightfully wishes to experience the pleasure of creation at its fullest, but does not yet know how without exploiting others and being parasitic. If, however, you can fully accept the beautiful force striving for full pleasure underneath the irresponsibility, so that becomes the beautiful problem, right? And value it as such, you will also find how to give it expression without infringing on others, without violating your own laws of balance. You will not have to pay the needless cost of worry, anxiety, guilt, and inability to manage well. You only pay that when you sacrifice peace of mind for a short-lived pleasure. The pleasure will be deeper, more lasting, and totally free of guilt when you combine its rightfulness with self-discipline. If you can reconcile desire for pleasure and self-discipline and responsibility, you will express the inner knowledge that says, I want to enjoy life. There is unlimited abundance in the universe for every contingency. There is no limit to what is possible. There are marvelous things to be experienced. There are many beautiful means of self-expression. I can realize them and bring them into my life if I can find another not self-destructive way to express and obtain them. The very need for self-responsibility and self-discipline, in their most profound sense, will make increasing joy and self-expression possible. Without these traits, I must remain deprived and in conflict. The discipline will be much easier to acquire. The willingness to do so will grow. And when you know that you have a perfect right to use it for the purpose of increasing pleasure and self-expression. So this is reminding me, like I have a lot of these issues more around my ADHD, right? And sort of, I don't know how much of it, is like, this inner conflict that may be expressing, in that way. But, the self-discipline somehow, feels beyond my capacity in some ways, and then, when I can, and I work with it as best as I can, and I do, enjoy sort of the superpowers of ADHD, and having the fun of that. But there is something about, like a confusion for myself around how to work with self-discipline with ADHD, because it is a kind of brain thing. But the Pathwork guide is also saying, everything in our physical expression and manifestation is ultimately coming from our spiritual conflicts and confusion. So, I think that it's possible. It's very deeply embodied, in the conflict. But, I think this is a good teaching for myself, to stop resisting, and fighting, like I can't do self-discipline, it's how I am, but to invite a harmonizing of the both and. So, my dearest friends, I have given you new material that requires a great deal of attention. Bring it to bear on your own specific situation, opening up your innermost being to applying this material. Do not apply it only theoretically, but see really where you deny what is in you out of fear and guilt, thereby paralyzing the best in you. To those of you here who are discouraged and feel hopeless about yourself, I can only say you are in illusion and error when you feel that way. Realize this and ask for the truth, which is that there is no reason for hopelessness, and difficult periods need only to be understood and worked through to make them stepping stones for opening your lives further and bringing more light and self-expression to them. Okay, so receive the love and blessings, my dearest friends. Be in peace. So, any final comments? For some reason, something popped into me, which is this poem. It's a hymn that I don't know. It's not Pathwork, but it seemed somehow it just popped in, so I might go ahead and read it. I don't even know. I can't remember everything it says, so I don't know if it's appropriate or not. But it did just kind of jump in there, so I might read that before we close. But any other comments or final considerations on this lecture?
I don't have anything. I thought it was really good.
Okay. So just like in closing, this is a kind of, praise of the divine, and a kind of, way of harmonizing and walking in balance type of uh, poem. So it says, Supreme Father, with you and our Divine Mother, creators of this life, I come to thank you. The greatness of having a living soul, from you to receive strength for the soul to exalt. Listen, see the good side of life. It is such great beauty that life has to serve. And the stones that arise on your path bring a divine knowing and strength to overcome. Many flowers I go planting on the way, always respecting thorns, I make life flourish. Brothers and sisters, seek your merits, facing your shadows with the force of God in you. In courage, firm in divine love, consecrating the enchantment of nature, and the cures in firmness will flow, clearing the way, making lighter the life. So I think, now I'm reading it seems like it's definitely related to the teaching and the lectures, and a beautiful, reminder for us in that. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Nice to meet you, Doretha.
Yeah, join us, and if you want to send me your email address, I can put you on the list for the link that next Wednesday, where we'll just kind of do a little practice of the process if you care to join us then.
Okay. You want me to drop it here?
Yeah, I can put it in the chat, I guess is this. I'm a little somehow still not so
Oh,
great
oh,
at
could
all
you?
this.
Well, I'll drop it after the recording stops. I don't want to,
Okay.
because it
Yeah, you
doesn't.
can do that. You know mine?
Oh, after the recording stops, I'll drop it in. I don't want it on YouTube, my email.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm gonna give you mine.
Oh, okay.
earthwalkways@gmail.com on the chat. So and if you want to just copy paste that and then send me an email,
Okay.
and that way I will be able to use that email and put it on.
Wait, what is your email? I'm sorry. I didn't see
So
it.
I'm putting it in the chat right now,
Oh,
so
okay.
so
Oh,
you
okay.
can copy paste from there.
All right,
Hopefully I
cool.
did it right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
thank
it's
you.
correct. And then yeah, just shoot me an email and we'll put you on the list.
Okay, I will. Thank you for holding the space. That was really nice. And yeah. I,
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed your participation and your perspectives, and sounds like yeah, this might be if you're looking for some
mhm.
connection around all of this stuff, this might be a good spot. So you're always welcome to come.
Yeah, thank you. I will drop in. Um,
Okay.
yeah, when I can. I have an erratic schedule at times, but I'll definitely be coming back.
Okay.
I enjoyed the
I
room
hear you that.
and your
Yeah,
space.
so if when you can, and I will just keep you on the list. I basically, I mean, it's on the meetup, but basically once I've connected it, I prefer to just kind of send emails, blind copy emails to a group, that's interested in
Okay.
receiving the link. And so I'll keep you on that unless you tell me to take you off, and you can just come and go as you please. Right.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Um, so I'm gonna go ahead and log out, and I'll shoot you that email now.
Okay.
Namaste.
Take care. Bye.